Okay. Great. Women are born of and entangled in history and representation. They bear the bodily markings of this historical legacy, and these social insignia ghosts and riddle the lived experience of those who are marked. Throughout history, violence has been used as a means to subjugate those marked women to keep them in a position of subordination. Women used to be considered chattel, entirely bereft of legal rights and economically dependent on their husbands. They thus had little option but to accept the treatment meted out to them. Husbands were even legally allowed to beat their wives for the first 4 decades of the 20th century. This is how deeply ingrained domestic violence is in our culture. Unfortunately, society has not completely abandoned this view of women as property. One abuser even told a Kentucky judge he had rights to beating his wife, saying, "I got papers on this woman." Alarmingly, this view is widely supported and even encouraged by society, which teaches men to view themselves as superior to women. Susan Taylor explains, early on, males learn they have the right to dominate females by threat of physical violence. Beat up a neighbor and get arrested. Beat up your wife and the cops tell you to take a walk around the block. Gendered hierarchies also permeate the legal system, as exemplified by U.S. Judge Don Roberts' statement that every woman needs a good pounding now and then. Although this control and coercion manifests itself differently in each individual life and is experienced as a personal event, it is still rooted in this larger context of a hierarchical and patriarchal gender relationship in the family and society. According to Harold and DeLuca, regimes create bodies in pain to make real their power and to anchor their ideological belief systems. This is exemplified by the body of a battered woman whose body is beaten when she tries to transcend society's hierarchical relations. The act of violence becomes the strategy of keeping the woman in her position. These structural relations perpetuate a cycle of violence where relatively minor forms of physical violence serve only to reinforce the ongoing strategy of intimidation, isolation, and control that extends to all areas of a woman's life, including sexuality, material necessities, relations with family, children, friends, and work. This violence is a major problem in our society where a woman is beaten every 9 seconds. All too often, this violence escalates to death. It is in the escalation of violence that death becomes a possibility, which perpetuates a femicidal culture where women become expendable and disposable. Our daily actions and thoughts prop up the system at the root of this femicidal culture. As Suzanne Kepler has noted, sexual violence is not the disturbance of otherwise equal gender relations. The violence of our most common sense everyday thinking, especially our personal will to violence, constitute the conceptual preparation, the ideological armament, and the intellectual mobilization which makes violence possible at all. Kepler thus reaches the conclusion that, as hard as it is to grapple with, we are the sexual violence, for we make it possible and we permit it to happen. Jacqueline Davis' story illustrates how the relations of domination produce violence. When she locked her husband out of the house to return the joke he had played on her the day before, she ended up in the hospital with a lacerated liver where she spent 4 hours on the operating table and 6 weeks in recovery. Jacqueline endured the abuse in hopes of protecting her 2 children. When she did finally file for divorce, thinking it would end the violence, her nightmare only intensified. Jacqueline reports, "He chased me with a gun, disguised himself to stalk me, kidnapped me from work, took me to my home and violently raped me. He even videotaped the assault. Before the police could arrest him for this last assault, James Murphy kidnapped me again. He brutally raped me, slashed my arm almost to the elbow, slashed my legs, urinated on me, and set my hair on fire." In court, the prosecutor dismissed all the felony charges against Jacqueline's will, telling her she felt that she was using the court to get her divorced. No, we don't need this shit. No, sit down. The dismissal of Jacqueline's case reveals that despite its horrific and far-reaching effects, domestic violence is a domain of rooted criticism. Society works to keep women quiet through the fear of economic independence and the embarrassment of failing to keep up their home in private. When a woman does speak out and try to make her abuse public, that abuse is shielded from public scrutiny because of this association of women with the private sphere, where they are unreachable due to their refusal to intervene in private affairs. Thus, by declassifying violence against women as private, society constructs a violent shield for men that legitimates and reinforces men's right to inflict violence upon women. Professors Maria Bavacqua and Carrie Baker explained that male authority and power of women is most fundamentally rooted in the maintenance of a violent shield for men. The shield constructed by the doctrine of the private sphere is exemplified in a Mississippi court ruling that family broils and dissensions cannot be investigated before the tribunals of the country without casting a shade over the character of those who are unfortunately engaged in the controversy. To screen from public reproach those may thus be unhappily situated, let the husband be permitted to exercise the right of moderate chastisement. Another court ruled that it's best to draw the curtain, shut out the public gaze, and leave the parties to forget and forgive, because a public exhibition of domestic quarrels widens the breach, makes reconciliation almost impossible, and encourages insubordination. Rulings like these only shield perpetrators from public scrutiny and personal accountability for violence against women, reinforcing the notion that men have the right to dominate women through physical violence. This ultimately means that even if a woman does actually try to transcend the societal structures telling her to keep her abuse private, courts can run roughshod over her desire to make her abuse public in order to guard the reputation of the abusive husband, keep the woman in the abusive relationship, and prevent insubordination. If this subordination of women is to cease, the realities of battered women cannot remain private. What'd you do with the solvency stuff? Find it now.
Take your 3-inch dick and go out on me.
Excuse me?
You heard me. Don't take your 3-inch dick anger out on me.
We'll deal with this later. Our methodology views the body as a site for political resistance. Just as the dominant regime creates bodies in pain to anchor the ideology that men have the right to hit women, forcing individuals to come to terms with these bodies can subvert these conceptions. Through body theater, the affirmative presents you with the body in pain and takes you to the moment of violence. This aims to demonstrate the social relation of the body, or, as Rebecca Snyder puts it, to peel back layers of signification that surround bodies like ghosts at a grave. The confrontation with the body in pain created by body theater brings the abstracted discussion of violence that traditionally occurs in the private into a public space in which audiences can reckon with the physical, emotional, and political effects of violence against women. The actual experience of the moment lays bare the decision to commit violence as well as the circumstances that enabled that decision. We are thus forced to grapple not only with the violence committed by the perpetrator, but the violence that we have committed in permitting and enabling the decision to be made. With the reality of violence no longer shrouded in silence and privacy, you no longer have the luxury of theorizing about what you would or could or should do, but are faced with the moment of violence and see what your reaction actually is. Mary Kay Desage, a professor of English and Women's Studies, explains in 2003 that experiencing the violence in this tangible form invites empathy and activism on the part of the readers and theatergoers by fostering a complex sense of intimacy among playwrights, actors, and audience, each of whom becomes a penetrating witness to extreme rights. This interaction between the viewer and viewed allows you to experience emotion and action typically absent in traditional one-way forums. Desage elucidates that as actors bear their bodies in pain, they enact on stage an in-your-face literality, a radical satiability that thwarts the consumptive mantra of desire. The heightened reality of the situation, increased connection, and involvement that accompany are a way that women's theatrical narratives challenge the capacity of a spectatorial, consuming male gaze to appropriate, fetishize, or otherwise sexualize women's bodies. The resolution serves as a site that induces a focused public discussion on our reaction to gendered violence. The power of the Supreme Court is not held by 9 justices, the decades of precedent, or the Constitution, but is within the hands of the people. The Supreme Court is a symbol of power that can be used by the oppressed to create political possibilities for their liberation. The decision in U.S. v. Morrison placed women on the margins of economies of power, ruling that intervention was not justified because women did not affect commerce. We overrule that decision by moving gender-motivated violence to the center of power via our display of the body in violence. Debate should be about the liberation of the oppressed. James Thompson and Richard Schnitter point out that even non-theater venues like debate are in fact rich in performance moments. What social theater does is rub up against and reveal the performative in the setting. By creating a theater of, by, and with silenced, marginalized, and oppressed peoples, we can all experience performance in a broader and deeper way than before. We can thus utilize these performative moments in debate to work towards liberation of the oppressed. Through body theater, we can reveal the unintentionally gendered performances that permeate debate, as well as beginning a discussion of our reaction in the face of gendered violence. Our framework is the best for debate because it forces us to come to grips with the bounds of our agency and privilege and use them for the liberation of the oppressed. We engage in praxis through our methodology of displaying the body in violence. This use of praxis is the only way to address oppression. According to Rajan in 1990, experiencing is not merely a requisite to developing good theory, it is only the body's experiencing as a political act that connects the private and the public. Politics is emphatically not a matter of formulating tactics and strategies for gaining power, it is rather applying the experiential lessons of suffering to the process of ordering our collective lives. The role of the body is crucial here because more can arise out of the body than whatever order society programs into it. By denying the body's capacity to contribute to political processes, discourses can justify macro socio-engineering because change cannot come from individual bodies, it must be imposed on them. Yes.
Cool. You say you overrule the decision of Morrison, right?
Right.
By ruling that gender-motivated violence is the center of power via display of the body in violence, right? What is the decision of Morrison?
The idea that the decision of Morrison that women are on the margins of the economies of power.
So Morrison said, we rule that women don't matter, women are don't matter on the margins of the economy.
Yep.
Thus, what? Like, what was this at stake? Like, VAWA, right? Violence Against Women Act, which was...
we say that...
The remedy was struck down of giving women access to civilian courts.
Or it says that it puts a shield over violence when...
Sure. In the world of overruling that decision, do you allow women access to federal civil remedies?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't construct a civil remedy. What we do is we overturn the
But the
logic
decision
of the
said-
decision, which is the idea.
Wait, so you
that
overturn the
it's
logic
not
of the
relevant to
decision, but not
opponent.
necessarily the decision itself?
Right.
That
we
is
always
the
have the
decision.
Supreme. Yeah,
I mean, you and I have different interpretations of what the decision is.
I don't
guess
think
it's where we're
anyone,
having a
the
problem.
decision of Morrison was VAWA is unconstitutional because of the reasons you gave. You are overruling the
Right, and we
reasons.
think that that
Does that
decision
mean-
is wrong.
Does that mean that they have access post-plan to federal civil
no, we
remedies?
say that Morrison's a bad idea.
Morrison's a bad idea?
Yeah.
Okay. Next question is this logic of the body. You're right that all speech act is an act of the body, aka we're speaking, and we have performative effects. I don't
Okay,
quite
that's
see
a
the
lot.
right line you're trying to describe.
Are you talking about the Rajon evidence?
Like,
or-
why is a slap, I guess, which is what your evidence is for the sight of the body, different from speaking or having performative effects or anything else like that?
Right. Our evidence says that, first of all, when you're able to humanize it, you don't talk about theories instead. If that violence becomes humanized, then it's the sort of in-your-face literality that the Shays talks about when she says that it's breaks the traditional one-way form of just like speaking or listening.
Was your presentation violence, or was it just the same thing, the fantasy of violence, or the demonstration of the imagination of a violent act?
It's not an imagination. It happens.
So whose
violence
I
happens.
missed what happened. I was sort of like off in my own head. What happened in your site? Can you just read
I mean,
what occurred?
we're gonna argue that, like,
You're arguing.
what happened was body theater, right?
What's theater mean? Does theater mean that you actually believe what happened was true, or is it just do you believe that
I mean, it was
the 3-inch dick thing, which was pretty funny, do you believe that type of representation and that type of language and the violence that occurred, or is that just a representation to show us?
Right,
Right.
it was a theater
It was
representation.
a theater representation, okay, so it was abstract, wasn't necessarily real.
Mhm.
I have 20 seconds left, so I have to go to the last question.
I mean, I know you weren't paying attention.
It's cool. I have one last question then.
Tell me.
I did have a question, but now I don't.
Are you done?
Yeah. Good.